All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. So this is welcome to another episode of The Full Set. I am here with my esteemed colleague, my favorite part of the show, when I can say my esteemed colleague, Ijeoma Oluo. Ijeoma, welcome to The Full Set. How are you?
I'm really good. How are you?
Oh, we're going to talk about your answer just
I mean,
now.
that's relative, right?
So I just want to explain that if y'all don't know who Ijeoma is, I just want to read off the bio, but we're going to get into what I think y'all should know about Ijeoma. So Ijeoma is a Seattle-based writer, speaker, and internet yeller. Her work on social issues such as race and gender has been published in The Guardian, The Stranger, Washington Post, ELLE magazine, NBC News, and more. Her New York Times best-selling book, So You Want to Talk About Race, was released January 2018 with Seal Press. Ijeoma was named one of the most influential people in Seattle by Seattle Magazine, one of the 50 most influential women in Seattle by the Seattle Met, one of the Roots 100 most influential Americans in 2017 and 2018, and is the recipient of the Feminist Humanist Award in 2018 by the American Humanist Association, the Media Justice Award by the Gender Justice League, and the 2018 Aubrey Davis Visionary Leadership Award by the Equal Opportunity Institute. Ma'am, you've been busy. Welcome to the Full Set. How are you today, Boo Boo?
You know, last night was tough. It's been stressful, but I just from my book and I'm feeling good as like that general relief of like, oh, 2 years, it's done. So I keep saying good, and then remembering that we're in a pandemic and the world is still.
And this is book number 2 place, for you. But, you know, are you dropping the title?
Yes. Yeah, it's called Mediocre, Dangerous Legacy of White Male America.
I'm trying not to laugh because I feel like everyone's been talking about how mediocre white men are, and then like here you go, just blasting and putting it on a book. So thank you for doing that so much. There's a chapter in one of the classes I teach called, because mostly white women come to anti-racism classes, right? And so there's a chapter that's like, and what about y'all's men? Like, you know, so thank you for saying all the things. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
So I want to get right into it. I had asked you how you were feeling, and you were like, it's relative. So I want to talk about the word fine in the midst of the pandemic. Like, you know, you didn't really say fine, but I feel like this is what we're doing. We're like, everything's fine. It's the puppy with the cup of coffee and everything is on fire, right? Like, how do we hold space for one another in the midst of so much loss and grief and not understanding, and then too much understanding and too much inundation with news? Like, how do we hold space during this time for one another or for ourselves even?
Yeah, you know, I would say it's really important to recognize that everything we're feeling is valid, right? Because I think sometimes we're like, okay, no, just be positive. Maybe, you know, you're healthy or you're not in the midst of this, so don't feel bad, or don't feel good because everything's falling apart, you know. And I think the truth is that part of the human condition means that we're going to face a lot of chaos and a lot of loss in our life, but also a lot of joy. And I think right now, just honoring this extraordinary situation that we're in, honoring our responses to it by letting them all come, right? So there have definitely been, you know, yesterday was a tough day, right? And then all of a sudden I'm laughing hysterically at something my partner is doing, right? And it's okay, you know, and it all exists. And I think I'm seeing a lot of people online apologizing for having reactions to what's going on, apologizing for taking up space with grief and fear and worry. And, oh, I'm sorry, I'm so negative. Oh, I'm sorry, I sound so down. We all are. And we're in a really scary time. And I think that we shouldn't apologize for that. And we shouldn't apologize for addressing the joy. I think we need to be open to whatever is happening and let our bodies and our brains kind of tell us what we need from one moment to the next, and know that that's going to change.
What brings you joy during this time? Like, if you could focus in, like, you know, we talk about pleasure activism quite often. Like, if you could focus on your pleasure, what things are bringing you joy in the midst of so much like I don't know, I feel isolated right now. And even though I'm talking with y'all each and every day, I feel like the circle around me gets smaller and smaller. So
Mm-hmm.
we can talk about that too, but I really just want to focus on like, how do I get to happy during this time? Like, you know what I'm saying? Because right now I'm very sad. So I
Yeah.
can't believe I just laughed when I said I was sad.
I think there's a couple of things. One, obviously, is my kids. Kids, I think, add stress and joy during times like this, right? But I'm recognizing when I think of this, I'm also thinking in the grand scheme of my life, this is going to be a very short period of time, no matter how long this lasts, really. And it will be a much more formative period of time for my children. Um, but what their world is much smaller than ours, right? Their world is often contained to this home, and especially now.
Right.
And so looking at their world, looking at where they're finding curiosity, encouraging that, spending time with them, still recognizing that they're growing during this time, they're experiencing things during this time. I think you can find a lot of joy if you have children, in just
Right.
experiencing things with them. And of course, there's times where they're scared and you're scared. But also, I think for me, in recognizing that this is a period of time that we are moving through, um, if I take time to notice what's different about it, right? Take time to notice what I'm learning from it. And I'm not one of those people who thinks we have to be hyper productive. There's a lot of
Okay.
pressure right now to be like, now write
Yeah.
that opus, now make that thing.
Now
No,
you
I
have
think,
no excuse to be your
right?
best self. I'm like, bitch, there's all
Like,
the
look,
excuses still. Like,
exactly. Even more. How about like the crushing fear of death 24/7? That's a great excuse
mm,
for not getting things done.
right.
But I think noticing this is an extraordinary situation that's probably not happening to us again. And so I find myself um, living in unique moments that I know won't happen again, finding out things about myself and how I deal with stress that I won't I may not get to see again, finding out little moments, finding what brings you joy in this, finding out what you can let go. I think this is a good time to take stock, to simplify, because you do have limited bandwidth emotionally, right? So I found out, I've always known I love like makeup, right? And that's definitely become even more of a ritual for me now that I'm at home, because it's time to just sit there and think about nothing else. But I don't like shaving my legs, so I've stopped shaving my legs, right? And I'm like, no,
Right.
I can let that go, and see what's that like. How do I feel about that? How do I feel,
Right.
about cleaning the house? That now that I know no one's coming over, what
Right.
parts of the house matter to me?
Right.
And how I feel sitting in it, and what things do I not care about at all? And
Mm,
that's been, for me, like that's been giving me at least some peace. And then just sometimes you have to force these little situations, especially I would say if you're not feeling like it. Sometimes if you feel like you need to cry and you need to sleep, cry and sleep. But also know what it looks like when you're in bed too much, because maybe you're getting depressed, because
right.
maybe your anxiety is taking over, and kind of push yourself out a little bit, right? So sometimes where I'm like, oh, I'm tired, I could just sit here for another day and just stare at the internet all day. I think, okay, no, you know what? Maybe I'll push myself for a quick game with my kids. Maybe I'll push myself for
Right.
this thing and see how I react. Maybe I'll push myself out for a walk, and see, and treat it kind of like an experiment. Know that it's new, and know that maybe the
That's
things
what
that
I was
used
going
to
to
work for
ask
you
you. Do you
won't
feel
work.
like you're experimenting more? And it sounds like you're just like, I'm in the stasis right now. Like,
Yeah. I was so busy before. I was traveling all the time, and now I'm busy with different things, right?
Right.
And I don't know what relieves my stress when I can't go out to a store, or I can't go hang out with friends or go out to dinner, right? So is there another thing? Is it
Right.
walking around in nature? Is it, drawing? Is it listening to music? Listening to a different audiobook? Experiment with it. And if it,
Right.
I think a lot of times we expect, and this is something I had learned in the past, just from various different traumas. I remember going to a therapist because the things that I used to do to stay calm stopped working. And I remember I took that as a sign that maybe I was backtracking, maybe I wasn't
Right.
doing well. And I remember my therapist was saying, well, this is a different time. Why would you expect that you would need the same thing? Why would you
Mm,
expect to always need the same things, the same comforts? Why would you expect to need what someone else did? Maybe you just don't like that thing anymore. Maybe that's just not comforting for you anymore. Maybe you need to try a new thing, and that can be exciting. And just experiment, and don't let, this is an extraordinary situation, so don't let notions of how you used to deal with stress guide the way that stress looks now. Don't let other people's goals become your goals. Listen to your body, know it's going to change, and know that we have very little reference. We have very little reference to a situation like this that's going to indicate what we need to do in the future, and it can change rapidly.
Right. So I wanted to ask you two questions. One, you mentioned makeup, so we'll get into that in a second. And two, like you were talking about work, right? And so like for those of us who are essential, and I know that your work is also very important, what does it look like for you working now? Like we've had to do a pivot, right? Like we've had to shift in this way. And I know when you say that I was booked and busy, you were out here like big traveling, like, I remember, well, we'll go into that in a second, but you're big traveling. And so I think I just saw maybe like last week you had your first keynote or something like that, like since this pandemic happened. And I feel like you're a great orator and you're a great storyteller, and you weave together stories with great skill and precision. And so what does that look like now digitally, not being able to read the audience? Like, what does that,
Yeah, that was hard. I mean, I would say in a couple of things. In the writing tip, it was very difficult, right? Because I think writing, it's an artistic field and it's an emotional field. And when your brain is taken up with all these other highly emotional issues, it can be really tough to set time aside for that. Like I have some friends who are like, writing is my therapy, but I think when writing's your job, you have a different relationship to it. Like writing is no longer my therapy. It stopped being my therapy a very long time ago. It became my job years ago. And sometimes it can be therapeutic at the end when it's done, but for the most part, it's a thing that can be very painful, drudging. It takes a lot of mental energy. And so to find yourself in the middle of a pandemic, and especially if you write about things like I write about, if you write about white supremacy in America, it's hard to remember that perspective too. It's vital, it's important, but pausing your thoughts, getting your brain to shift focus from, am I going to die from coronavirus to how can I not die from white supremacy, right?
It's same.
It's tough. Yeah.
You're like, it's tough. It's same.
It's tough, and it's tough to split your brain like that. It's tough to move from a slow burning crisis, from the immediate crisis to the slow burning crisis that kind of takes over everything. And it doesn't feel healthy, right? It doesn't feel healthy to be like, let me set aside my fears of coronavirus so I can focus on white supremacy for a while, right? So that's been difficult. And I think creatively, a lot of people are struggling and don't know why. And I would say that, it makes sense. Our brain is a muscle like anything else, and it's working overtime with the coronavirus itself. And then from like speeches, that was weird because definitely.
Were you able to see the individuals you were speaking to? No, right? When you do a webinar like this, we can't see nobody, Exactly. It's only because I'm multitasking on my phone that I'm responding to people's comments and seeking out questions. So
yeah, no, I couldn't see anything. And I heavily rely, especially because race is so complex. Right. I think it's very important when you're giving a talk to be able to see how white people are responding versus how people of color are responding. And no, am I doing something that's safe for people of color, that's uplifting people of color, or am I saying something that's maybe harmful? Am I saying something that's not registering, right? Like you're constantly adjusting based on how people are interacting, and that was completely gone.
And what are the cues that they're giving you? You're like, hope it works.
Exactly, right? The one thing I noticed is I am better at this than I thought. Like, you know what I mean? Like I've done this long enough that I do kind of know what the cues are. I remember, I've learned enough, and I have to trust in the work I've done over the years, the hundreds of speeches I've given. I have to trust that I still know what I'm doing. And also I would say, if you're working in this and you're giving like online speeches or talks, the space we used to give to register with the audience so they could hear what we're saying, we still have to give online.
Right. Okay.
We still have to pause.
You still need those pauses. I was just about to say. You still need the tone and inflection in your voice when you're making that joke to land the pain easier,
Exactly. Yeah. But it's weird and awkward. But it's better than nothing. And Yeah, and I don't know. We're all trying online. I mean, it's, as a speaker, of course, all my talks for most of the year were canceled. And now people are coming back and realizing, okay, this is long term. We still have to have talks. We still have to have these meetings. We're
Yeah,
trying to figure out what this looks like in an online space,
that
how
makes
to
me
keep
so
people
sad.
engaged. I know it does.
Yeah.
I didn't realize, because I hate traveling, right? I'm afraid of flying still, even though I
Love
have
it.
flown hundreds of flights over the last year. Um, and I take anxiety meds to get on a plane every time. But I didn't realize how much I miss having these meaningful conversations and seeing other people and just having these conversations, right? And so we have to find a new way for now. It's temporary, but we have to, because these issues still exist, right? We still have to keep doing the work. So we have to find a way, but it's tough. And then as far as like essential workers, my partner is an essential worker who has to leave to go to work.
Right.
So that at the beginning was really terrifying, right? At the beginning, I was very
You're like,
much like,
no, you absolutely
can
can't be
I
doing
just,
your job that
yeah,
you've been doing.
exactly. Can I just encase you in a bubble and
Right.
leave, so that you can never leave the house,
Right.
and realizing a couple of things. One, that, his work, of course, is very important to him. And, he works in radio, and it's an
Okay.
essential service. And that matters, right?
Right.
And that, also he's a grown ass man, which I have to keep reminding myself, like, I can't just, keep him in a bubble. But, working and realizing, that they're putting a lot of thought into that. But of course, it's a variable, and you realize that a lot of people are in these situations, and in a lot more dangerous situations as essential workers. But that
Right.
the people who are most likely to have to leave for work are going to be people of color. And that's the reality of it. But, and it's weird for him too, to go into a workspace that now has almost no people, and where he has to spend, all this time sanitizing everything before he can sit down and
Right.
work. And, that's interesting. And we're all kind of trying to do this work without any interaction with other humans. But I just keep reminding myself, in the grand scheme of my life, this will be a short period of time. We have to
Right.
get through it. We have to get through it together.
So I want to take a question. I have we don't like, just for people to understand what the show is about. We don't plan in advance. Like, I just sent Ijeoma the link. Thank you for having grace during this time, because I was like, I've got everything under control. I've got to get my hair done. I've got to order the food for Egypt. I've got to
Mhm.
and then you were like, babe, I don't have the link. And I was like, my bad. So no, thank you for being understanding. But I have already my list of things to talk about. But someone asked me for my Cash App when we're promoting you have a GoFundMe up. And the GoFundMe for Ijeoma is a link for mutual aid artists. Do you want to go and explain that to us? And then I'll ask the question from the audience.
Yeah, definitely. So we started a little over a month ago, maybe a month and a half ago, basically a mutual aid fund for Seattle area artists, performing artists, visual artists, artists of all kind who
Right.
have been impacted by this, because they were some of the first people whose gigs were canceled. They have very little backup, and it'll also be likely the last industry to recover. It'll be a long time before bars are open, a long time before we have concerts, before optional art classes are opened up. And so we have been able to distribute over $500,000 to over 900 Seattle artists. Every penny goes directly to Seattle area artists, and we're focusing our efforts to make sure that our outreach is primarily focused on Black, Indigenous, POC artists, trans artists, disabled artists, to make sure that they get access to this mutual aid. And it's not a ton of money. It's really an emergency fund, but it's a low barrier. We don't want people having to beg. We don't want people having to turn, into grant, like, we don't want it to be a job applying for grants and things like that. We want
Right, of
people
course.
just be able to get their groceries if they need it, get their meds if they need them. So that's our project. And we are partnered with Langston, which is, Langston is a Black theater advocacy group run by Tim Lennon, and their goal is to advance Black excellence in the arts. They are our fiscal sponsor, sending out checks. and making sure that we can get these payments out smoothly. So every penny helps an industry, a group of people who've been hit so hard and have been really, really forgotten in this crisis. Like everyone's turning to art right now, right? Everyone's reading these books, listening to music, can't wait for the online shows, and people forget that the artists have been devastated by this crisis, and that they should be compensated, and that if we want the arts to come back, if we want these concerts, if we want there to be art in the next crisis, we have to make sure that artists can afford to eat, and stay in the city. And Seattle has, one of the highest cost of living in the country. So artists who are often working gig to gig, who lost tens of thousands of dollars already, are in desperate need of help.
So can you do me a favor? That's why I like reading the comments. No, like you said, we're all just managing in the midst of this pandemic. So I copied your bio and the GoFundMe link directly from the email that I was sent. And this GoFundMe is actually not the Seattle initiative. So can you do me a favor? Well, you don't have to do me the favor. We'll make a white person do it. White people, do me a favor. Go to Ijeoma's page and look for the Seattle Artists Mutual Aid Fund link. And
you can actually, if you just go to Langston, go to langston.org/SARF, and that will have everything in it.
So thank you for saying that. And then once someone posts that, I will make that the pinned comment. Oh my goodness. But also support that baby. Oh my God. So there is that. So something I wanted to talk to you about is, I think what y'all are doing is great. There has been a conversation, amongst artists like on the East Coast, where it's like, if most artists, like you said, are actually not able to work as artists full time or whatever, right? And so like most people that I know have jobs, like I'm a full-time executive assistant. White people are consistently telling me to go to work, and I'm like, do I have to go to work right now? Like, I don't want to, right? And I think about, a friend of mine, she's completely out of work, and I was like, apply for an artist grant. And she said something to me that I really had to consider. She was like, artist grants aren't for me, even though she's been a performance poet for over 20 years. She was like, because I can't show like a continued, like, and so I don't know. Do you have any thoughts about like the nonprofit industrialization complex?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Absolutely. No, I mean, and that's been what's so frustrating about this. Like when we set it up, I grew up in that system, right? I grew up on grants, government assistance, everything, right? My mom, as a single parent of 3 kids, we tried to do everything to get by. And I remember how dehumanizing, how many hoops you had to go through, how really gross it is, how little we trust poor people, especially people of color.
Right.
And so I didn't want that. And, it was interesting. So for our application, right, it's literally a questionnaire. You just say what gigs you had that were canceled, and then how much you need to get by. That's it. Like
Boston Foundation, you don't need to be paying attention. My NAACP's keynote got moved till fucking October. It's so ridiculous.
Yeah. And what was interesting about that, right, is we did that on purpose. That was really conscious. I did not want anything that would I would rather bet on people and have a couple people make stuff up.
I said, I know if you was involved, it was a different thing. It's a different thing. I'm not talking about your, I'm just talking about in general.
But what we discovered right away that was funny though was, first of all, the only people who were aghast at how easy it was to apply and get money were white people. And they were like, even like white artists were like, what do you mean? You can just say you need money and you'll get money? And I'm like, yeah.
Right.
They're like, oh, well, you're asking for a scam. And like, I can see who's applying. I know these people. This is my community, right? It's very legit. People are being so kind. People are asking for the smallest amount possible. They're like, oh, I lost $10,000, but what I really need is $200 to get groceries for the month, right? People are trying. They know they're trying to spread this out. But it was hilarious to see this notion of like, what do you mean? You would just give it to people,
right?
But also, what I saw is a lot of people who work in larger foundations were like, I was hearing from some of the people who were in it really for the love of helping people, who were like jealous. They're like, oh my God, I'm so jealous that you just get to give money to people. We can't do that. We have all these rules, all these things we can't do.
Right.
And it's really sad because the truth is that we have gotten money to people before anyone else did. And we have been keeping people afloat where no one else has. And I'm hearing from artists left and right who are like, I applied for 12, 15 different types of assistance. You are the only person who gave it to us. It's really disgusting. And it's also really disgusting to see how many of these trusts and funds are able to sit on their money right now. They're acting like they're the ones at risk. And they're not giving money out. We have billions of dollars sitting there that's supposed to be earmarked for charitable causes that aren't being released because they're like, oh, well, we don't know what the stock market's going to do. Oh, we don't know. You know what? Yeah, of course we don't know. And now is where you give to keep people afloat. Isn't that why this money is set aside? And it's been really disgusting because you would think right now people would be coming out of the woodwork, bringing all of their money, their millions and billions they have set aside, quote unquote, you know, for charitable causes that they're getting these tax breaks from.
Or what I like to call charitable offenses.
Right? And you think this is where they would be putting it out. And no, they're sitting on it. They're sitting on it now more than ever. And it's really gross. And we need to look at that and look at these groups and say, I hope at the end of this, they will look at who gave the money out, who got out to people, to individuals, not big businesses, right? Not these programs that just also sat on it and said, oh, we're going to use it for our overhead, or we're going to make sure we can survive instead of the people we serve. Look at who got money for the people. And that's where you need to put your money next time. Don't put it in these spaces that aren't getting money to the people. It's really gross to me to see how tight-fisted our foundations have become right now in this, and how selfish they've become. Because
like even
the
Harvard,
behind this are going to, the people behind this are going to be fine. Right. The people behind these foundations will be fine, but they're acting as if these foundations are more important than the people they serve. And I'm also seeing that too with arts organizations, with, you know, who had promised work to these artists and the work was canceled, the events were canceled. And not only are they not helping out the artists that they, you know, that who invested time and money into upcoming shows and exhibitions and classes, they're also laying off their staff with no medical, you know, no severance, because they think that that building is more important than the people who keep it running. And it's absolutely disgusting to me. And we really need to look at who kept the human beings going, who kept the people who are down and out going. And that's where we need to invest our time and energy when this is up. I really hope we keep a strong accounting. You know, we're keeping an accounting of what all these artists are losing because no one else is asking. No one's asking. How many of your gigs, how many gigs were canceled? What does that mean? Everyone's like, will this theater still exist? And that matters. But no one's asking, will these artists still exist? You know? And it's just, I mean, we all knew that the nonprofit industrial complex was problematic in many, many ways. But seeing it become even worse in times of crisis has been really disturbing.
I appreciate you saying that. My next article is going to be based largely in part off my 15 plus years of experience working for all nonprofits, and also largely borrowing and obviously crediting a lot of the work that the amazing femmes from Incite the Color of Violence have been doing about, you know, the revolution will not be funded. So, you know, I'm just really excited about that. But you had written a tweet on April 16th. You had said, just a reminder that the normal many are so eager to get back to is one in which so much wealth has been hoarded at the top that millions of Americans were left financially devastated by their first missed paycheck. And I personally know someone who has helped me out of situations a lot. And now she is needing to move. And so like, it's really weird for me to reckon with that because, you know, here I am talking about rent strike. And then the person who's kind of been like my financial stability has been like, well, we've got to move out of our house. Like, you know what I'm saying? So, I mean, the fact that y'all are being data informed and not data driven around like what you're saying is it's not just about how much money we've raised or how much we're giving away. We're also documenting how much money people are losing because of this, you know? And so do you think, you know, everyone's talking about such a pivot. This is the time to change the environment, right? And do you think that things are going to go back to status quo?
Yeah, I do. In a way that's actually works for people of color and for poor people in this country. I want to be hopeful. I think we have an opportunity for things not to. I really do. But I think that right now, our media especially is doing a very good job of steering conversation away from that. We're not talking about the reasons behind why this has been so financially devastating. We aren't talking about the fundamental steps we need to take to get out of that. Right now, we're treating our big businesses like they're heroes because they're donating some masks while they're sitting on billions of dollars of profits that they could be using to help their workers first and foremost, right?
Right.
It's really gross. And I don't see, and part of it, honestly, I think is the fact that we have a pandemic that stops us from coming together and talking about our experiences. So I think the shift that needs to happen, right, is we have to be much more open about our experiences. We have to get better at talking about money, which is something Americans have never been very good at. We have to be honest about not only what our financial reality is now, but what our financial reality was before now.
Our
We need to be
financial
talking
reality.
yeah.
What a
And
term.
yeah, we got to start talking about, really like how much debt we were in before. Talk about what our cushion was before and why. Talk about what our wages are. Talk about what our boss's wages are. You need to start talking with your coworkers and find out who's making more and less than you and start figuring out why, right? We need to start talking about what percentage of companies' profits are actually getting to people. But the problem is of course, the nature of this illness, and I think that's why there's no motivation, is it's keeping us in our homes. We can't get together and have these conversations. And they know we can't get out into the streets,
right?
Because we don't have that kind of white audacity right now that conservatives have to try to risk death, to think that.
Oh, you was gonna talk about it? I wasn't sure. I was like, I don't know.
We don't have that, right? We believe in science enough to know that we can't risk our lives out there, and I think that they know that there's not going to be an angry mob right now, so they're just ignoring it. But the truth is that some people will coast through this just fine. And others, a huge amount of people, are going to be financially devastated. And because there are people who coast through it just fine, they're going to keep running. The big businesses are going to keep going.
Right.
And it's not going to lead to a fundamental shift unless we find a way in this crisis to keep talking about it, to share stories and find the underlying patterns, to recognize our rights, to recognize that it's not the crisis that did this. It's the fact that our system was so broken that we couldn't weather even a month of crisis before things started falling apart. And we have to really talk about that. We have to talk about the fact that the reason, there's a lot of weird white supremacy and things like that behind these protests to open up states, right? But we also should talk about how absurd it is that the only options we have in one of the richest countries in the world is to risk financial devastation or risk death. Right? That we have encouraged so much about profit. We have encouraged so much about getting money out of the hands of people who are creating things as quickly as possible, to get that money out into investors as quickly as possible and away from the public as quickly as possible. That even our businesses don't have enough cushion to keep going for more than a month in crisis. There's something very, very broken about that. And we have to look at that. And that means we have to be looking at our life before. We have to stop romanticizing before. We have to really realize the position we were in and look at that and say, you know what, it wasn't great. It may have felt great because we live in a consumerist society, because we've been thrown all these little things to distract us. We could go to the mall, we could buy a new gadget, we could do these things. The mall, nobody goes to the mall, but you know what, I'm old, I'm showing my age there.
At least you didn't say like the shopping center. I mean, you're right.
But you know what I mean? Like, we could do all these things that made it seem like we were better off than we were. We could get that new iPhone. We could do all, and have peanut pants for it.
I feel personally attacked.
And all of this made it seem like we were winning this capitalist game. And there is no winning this capitalist game for the everyday person. And I think that we need to use this to reappraise. And start demanding more, and know that we've always had the right to demand more. But and I think now's a good time for that. We are leading up to an election, so if we start having these conversations, we can start pushing our candidates to start having these conversations as well. And I'm not saying it's going to lead to fundamental change, but you know what? I don't care if you mean it or not, right? I know that politicians will do what they need to do to get elected and keep getting elected. And if they have to pretend to give a damn about poor people to get elected, then you know what? I don't care, right? That was a really good time to be forcing these conversations, and we should.
So I want to force that conversation because it's on my list. I had one thing on my list, and now I'm making like parallels and drawing lines. It's great. So I promised LaShondia that I would ask you a question because she was also feeling really sad this week. And I told her, I was like, I will ask whatever question. And so Miss Griffin's question was, Ijeoma, do you find it more painful to write about white supremacy with the starkness this pandemic has shown that this country has for us?
Absolutely. Yeah. And especially seeing how it's impacted Black and Indigenous communities, especially, has been even more gutting. Like and to watch too, that, oh, we're still murdering Black people in the street right now. Like that's still a thing that's happening. People are breaking their quarantine to murder Black people in the street, right? Fuck, devastating. And yeah, and I was finishing up my book as this started, and I was like, oh, okay, and one of my colleagues that I was in this program with at Harvard died, a Black man in Detroit, and it was heartbreaking. And I'm like, oh, okay, now I have to pause, and I'm going to go look up this genocide of Native people to write for this chapter of my book. And yeah, that's it's incredibly devastating. And the trauma of the work we do, any of us who work, it's the trauma of being, a Black person in America is huge. If you work in any kind of racial justice field, the hard part is that you do the work and you expect to be able to set it aside. And, I know people who work as counselors, people who, work in, rape advocacy intake centers, right? Who do work that really guts you. And then they go home and they build a space where they can recover. When you're a Black person, you go home and it's not necessarily a space you can recover. And I think right now what we're seeing for people who deal with this sort of trauma day in and day out, that this virus is bringing, like knowing that I have a bigger chance of dying just because I'm Black, right? Knowing that I'm going to get worse care because I'm Black, right? Knowing that there will be decisions made about whether or not I'm worth saving, and that would be because I'm Black. Knowing that my peers, my friends, the people I love have no idea if they have pre-existing conditions because doctors have treated them like shit their whole lives and they haven't gone to a doctor in 20 years for good reason, right? It's all because they're Black. And that's what's waiting for me when I set my work down, right? So, writing all day about white supremacy, setting that down, and then checking the news, living this life, having this weighing on you. It's, it's harder. It's definitely hard. And it was interesting because I think, everything we went through last year with the swatting and everything like that at our house.
Can you explain really what swatting is? Because some people don't know.
Yeah. It's where you spoof a phone call to law enforcement with a bomb threat, a murder threat, something like that. With the goal is to get armed police officers to someone's home. So that happened to us. And my son was targeted last year, and it was very traumatic. And it was part of a year-long campaign of kind of terrorizing us in our home. When that lessened, partially because we moved, we had to move. I think it had just started to hit me, and I was just processing, right, all of that trauma. And I had been writing my book the whole time. And I remember my doctor being like, Ijeoma, you can't do this. Like, you can't keep writing all day about these horrific things and then coming home and feeling unsafe in your home. This is not, you can't heal. So I was just processing it, and like kind of my body was doing this delayed reaction to the trauma, because I think like many of us, especially Black women, we kind of go into survival mode where it's like, nope, you know what? I will feel this later. I will deal with this later. So I was dealing with that, and it sucked. Like, it sucked. I was completely falling apart. It really sucked. Okay. And once I realized what was happening, it was a little better. I was like, okay, I get it. This is part of the process, right? This is the trauma process. And then immediately, probably, right in the middle of trying to get through that, this happens. And I'm definitely back in survival. Definitely short-circuited that entire thing. And it's like, nope, you know what? Maybe 6 months from now,
I can focus on this, right?
Yeah.
Because do you remember that there was a time that you and I were actually roped together for whatever reason? You had just went through a really traumatic experience at Cracker Barrel. And first of all, bitch, I really didn't understand why you were at Cracker Barrel. But now I understand, because I did order from them the other day. I'm sorry. I did.
It was the only place open. Yeah, we were in Montana on a road trip. There was no other place to eat. Like, nothing else existed. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'll
Yeah.
allow it. I'll allow it. But I was like, their macaroni is not good. So,
No,
okay.
no, yeah, the grits are
Yeah,
watery
no, it
too.
wasn't good at all. And so you and I had gotten roped in together. And I forget how, I think it was because you defended me. That's what happened. White
It,
supremacists were writing about me and just,
yeah.
body shaming me and saying all the things. I didn't have a job,
Hmm.
even though I was, getting paid $60,000 a year to work somewhere, I guess. You know what
Yeah.
I'm saying? So, and it's so pervasive. And I reached out to you when the swatting happened and I was just, because I know and I understand,
Hmm.
and so it's very scary. So with that said, I want to talk about something I saw on Beyonce's bandwidth.
Hmm.
I don't know if you remember January of this year very well, since it's been 20,000 years since then. But there was a quote by pretty famous author. I don't know if you know him. He says, "As a writer, I'm allowed to nominate in just 3 categories." He was like, "I'd never consider diversity in matters of art, only quality. It seems to me
Hmm.
that no otherwise would be wrong." And he also said that writers are not underscored by acts of violence, right? And I'm talking about Stephen King, of course.
Yeah.
And so
Hmm.
I recall reliving the thread in which so many Black femmes went and read him for filth on Twitter. And what is your thoughts about just the pervasive, I guess, can I go back to something? You said, quote, "When we identify where our privilege intersects with someone else's oppression, we will find our opportunities to make real change." Is there a point for any person of Stephen King's caliber to make real change?
Yeah, I mean, if I mean, especially like he's literally talking about like a nomination process, right? Like that's a power he has right there. That
Right.
he's like, I'm not going to engage with my, any of my privilege in this space. Yeah, no, he has huge power to make change, right? He has huge platform, millions of people listening to what he says, right? And in fact, because he can say the same ignorant shit that a lot of weird, misguided white dudes say, and we're all talking about it, right? Huge platform, huge opportunity for change. He has a huge audience of young white men who need to hear more enlightened, empathetic, aware views on race and gender. And he's choosing not to. He's choosing to validate,
Right.
um,
He's like, nothing to
what
see
they
here.
already think. Yeah, nothing to see here. No, you're right. If you make it, you made it only because of your skills. And, what you've gone through is only, has nothing to do with race, has nothing to do with gender. And, your voice, even though it's the same voice that's been heard since the beginning of time, is just as, important as the people who are never heard. And, and it's just ridiculous. Yeah, he has huge power to make change. And I think that part of, what's interesting is he knows that. And I think that's part of why he does this. And people like him do this because he wants to let himself off the hook for not doing something. There's no reason for him to comment otherwise. It's threatening
Right.
him and the level of action that he's taking or not taking, right? It's threatening his position. He's saying this because he's seeing other people in similar positions having different conversations and making different choices. And he doesn't want to look at what that means about him as a person, especially because he
Mm.
wears his liberal cred so hard,
Yeah, what does
right?
that say about you as a person, that you're saying like I feel like the fact that he said so broadly from his cis het white male like
Mm-hmm.
throne, nothing bad happens to writers, while so much has happened to you, to Roxanne.
Mm-hmm.
The comments that they make about Roxanne are really just deplorable. And I know that there's so many of us. I know that even for someone like with my size of a platform, just like I don't even know where these fucking people come from. Like, you know
Yeah.
what I'm saying? Like who signaled them? Like who
Yeah.
who blew the smoke up their ass? Like, and so that's what I mean is, to me, I feel like whiteness is so pervasive and it's dangerous. And like, I don't understand why white people don't understand that, how inherently violent that they are, um
I think there's so much about whiteness that I can understand, right? Like my mom is white and I grew up in Seattle. So I grew up inundated with whiteness. But what I don't know is what it feels like to get all the way through to adulthood without realizing what whiteness means. Like I don't know that feeling. I don't know what
mm,
that ignorance, how that has to shape your world, because white people are allowed to go through their entire lives without knowing what whiteness means, without knowing what they're a part of. We don't get to preschool without knowing what blackness means, right?
mm,
Because it dictates how we're treated, how we're seen. We know we have to moderate our speech, our actions. We know we have to be hyper aware of how people who aren't Black are looking at us and how they're, perceiving us. We have to be aware of how we're writing and the language we're using, right? We can't speak the way we speak to our friends when we're writing our papers or trying to get published. We are hyper aware of our Blackness at all times. Whiteness never has to be aware. And you can be called a genius and never know the most important factor of how you navigate the world, to have no idea about it, to never have to think, how does my whiteness look to other people? What is the power of my whiteness? How am I, playing into any sort of collective action or collective viewpoint? You never have to look at it. Right. And I don't know what that's got to be like, especially when you have so much smoke blowing up your ass, when you can be called a genius, when you can be called the storyteller of our time, and still not know what whiteness is, and still not know how you're portraying whiteness to other people. I don't know what that has to feel like. I don't know what that dissonance has to feel like, to be told, oh, no, you know nothing about yourself.
Right.
Like, what does that have to, especially if you're like Stephen King, right? And you're a writer, and your job is to translate human experience. And the biggest
and I was about to say, and especially fear, right? That's his niche, and so how can he, you could never write about Black fear, but to act as if it doesn't exist or it's some anomaly, right?
Well, and he doesn't even know how to write about white fear, right? Because the fear that he writes about is the fear that doesn't happen, right? The fear are the things living under your streets, right? And not the fear of the Black man walking towards you when you're at night, right? Because that's the fear that he can have and never have to investigate. And that's the thing that, I would love white, that's the thing as a writer too, that's frustrating for me. So much writing about whiteness is so boring and doesn't actually write about whiteness.
It's super fucking boring.
I would love to read a book written about whiteness that actually talks about whiteness and how whiteness functions. And it doesn't have to be I'm tearing down racism. I have a friend Jenny Forrester, who wrote a memoir of her mother and a memoir of growing up like in the West. Like when we think of the West, like the old West, right? She grew up like in Montana and Wyoming.
Like tumbleweeds?
Yeah, exactly. Trailer in the middle of nowhere, hunting for food.
This sounds like a bad movie set. Go ahead.
Right? But she wrote about it in such a not a moralizing way, in a real stark, aware way, not trying to preach something, but walking by, and the casual racism that happens is written in there. And it's not saying I was disgusted and I would have fixed it and I would have, no, you wouldn't have. Right. And it's acknowledging that. I walked by, I saw this happen, I did nothing. Move on, next scene, this happened, right? And it's such a picture of whiteness that's so recognizable to me, and yet something I have never read in a book written by another white person, where they could recognize like, oh, this is part of white culture, right? This casual fear, this casual bigotry is actually a part of white culture. Right. It's what I participate in, even as a good person. And I'm not going to moralize it. I'm not going to say that it kept me up at night, because it didn't, right? Mm-hmm. There's so much interesting writing about whiteness.
I'm going to tag a writer right now.
There's so much interesting writing that can be done about whiteness that's not being done, and instead we're getting all this weird bullshit. I would love to see something that I can recognize, because I think people of color know whiteness way better than white people, because we have to.
Like, I spot, is that you playing in the Himalayas?
No, like we have to know, right? Like I have to know what an angry white person looks like. I have to know when a white person's scared, even though they're telling me they love me, right? Like I have to know all of these things, because I can't get by otherwise. And a white person can feel all these things, do all these things, and never have to investigate it. So I don't know, maybe we need to start writing about it.
Oh, I would love to. So I once told someone in 2015, we're no longer friends because they're white. And sometimes white people, I know you're laughing, but sometimes white people who are your friends, they think that I think that there's a care and concern that they give that's actually mirrored in their own care and concern. So I guess this person never understood that me fighting for Black liberation was actually me fighting for myself and for my child and for my children's children. And I remember one time he was like, I just feel like you're doing too much. You're like 7 months pregnant. You've been on 4 flights in the past 6 months. And I was like, would you say it to a white woman? I don't know, and I think about how much my hard work has landed me. I want to say thank you. after I say thank you, we're going to talk about respectability politics. So I want to say thank you because and I'm talking about respectability politics because at a time when I was just a baby organizer, I mean, and I feel like sometimes I still am because I run into people that be like, well, I've been doing this shit and working on the same campaign for 20 years. And I'm like, oh, how's that going? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, so when I think about like when I first came in and like, you know, I started writing for the Huffington Post, I was like having poets edit my shit. And, you know, when I started writing for BLM didn't want to publish my stuff because they were like, you're not writing for our audience. And I was like, because your audience isn't Black people. But anyways, that's neither here nor there. So I was like, I'm going to write about the stuff that I want to write about. And that, you know, I started publishing on Medium. And I don't know where you came from. I really don't. And I'm just so grateful that your team or you stumbled across some of my articles and was like, you know, you reached out to me and was like, we'd like to publish this. This was at a time that I won't say the name of the magazine, but I was offered a monthly column and was asked, we'll pay you $850 for your very first article. And I never heard of anything like that. And I wrote, Mark Zuckerberg hates Black people. And they were like, we cannot publish this. And I was like, what? And I was like, let me call Ijeoma. Like, you know, saying like, and so I just want to say thank you because you really gave me an opportunity to showcase what knowledge that I have and what I really want to like craft and tell people about, because a lot of people weren't trying to publish me. And it's so funny because a lot of the pieces that were published actually made not just a lot of money, but it made a lot of sense. Like, you know what I'm saying? And I just want to say thank you for giving me the opportunity because if you all wouldn't have, I'm not sure what this platform would be right now. So I just want to say, you know, sometimes I get really aggy, you know, but I just want to say thank you because it does mean a lot to me. So.
Well, I'm glad that you trusted your voice, you know. It's an industry that tries to get Black women not to, but there's no sure way to failure than letting your voice go and not recognizing it as the skill and the talent. And not recognizing its value, and you kept with that, and that's really important. So I'm just proud to be any sort of part of it. Absolutely.
Thank you. And it's also like I stopped fucking around with white editors because they were crafting my they were crafting my message to their white audience, and I was like, yes, I talk about whiteness, and yeah, I talk about the pervasiveness of Becky's and the Caucasian invasion. When I talked about the Surge article, nobody wanted to help me write that shit. Not even my editor that I have now wanted to help me. It's not going to make sense. People don't even know who Surge is, which is true. Like, you know, and I was just like, you know, so I just want to say thank you because I feel like I've taken a huge pause on writing. The article I'm working on now, like I said, is about the nonprofit and my 15 plus years of experience and like asking other Black women to share in and chime in with their stories, because I think that it's important to uplift the voices of the people it actually affects. But I wanted to talk to you about respectability politics. You had shared, you went to, I feel like I keep running into y'all niggas at the New York Writers Institute. I just ran into Damon Young too. So you had shared a story, and I think that you've shared this actually a couple of times, but I'd like for you to share it with my audience. You know, we were talking about the distancing, you know, a lot of times people act as if classism, or I won't say casual racism, but like this whole, you know, this is us versus them type of Blacks. And you'd shared a story about a picnic, and I was hoping that you could share that story. You're like, do I have to? But I was hoping that you could share that story because I feel like, I hate to say it, but coming from you, I feel like people would respect it and understand it more. It doesn't matter how much I talk about respectability politics. Literally, people are like, oh, you're just angry and bitter. Like, you know, so if you could share that story, I'd be really grateful for that.
Yeah, so it's actually a chapter in the book as well. And it was really just kind of where I had realized my own some of because I'm sure I have a lot more of failings in recognizing my power and privilege as a Black person. And, you know, I was part of this social group in Seattle, and Seattle is a hard place to be Black, right? We're about 5 to 6% Black in the city.
I know I came to visit you and I wanted to leave immediately.
Yeah, it's a really tough place to be Black. And so we had this social group, and we would have these great dinners. We would have, you know, like we would have these art things, and it was very, like, it felt very fancy. We felt very cool. And I suddenly, even though I'm a lifelong Seattleite, felt like I had more Black friends than I ever had in my life. And we were hanging out having a picnic in this incredibly white area where, like, in Capitol Hill, where I had never felt comfortable, right? And we're having a picnic, and there's like hummus and bottles of wine, and there's like
I already
40
know how
Black
white it is when you
people.
say hummus, baby.
But it's all Black people, right? So
Right.
we're all lounging around. And then all of a sudden there was another group of Black people who were not in our group, who had been playing basketball. And you could tell they were very curious as to what this giant flock of Black people were doing, lounging in the middle of this park in one of the more hostile neighborhoods
Right.
in the city. And so they came wandering over, and aesthetically there were huge differences, right? Like we're in our artsy clothing, right? And these guys had literally just come off the basketball court, and they're like, what are y'all doing? Like, what's happening? And they're like, but the whole crowd stopped. Everyone felt uncomfortable, and there was this sense of like, they came from outside, they don't belong, right?
Mm-hmm.
This group that had built itself up, talked about how great it was it existed, had done all these great things. There were Black people that didn't belong in it. And it was the economic and social indicators they gave off just in their walk, in their clothing, that indicated they did not belong. And everyone was uncomfortable for quite a long pause. It was really noticeable. And I was wondering, I was like, God, what is this shift in this air?
Right.
And then eventually someone was like, oh, you want some hummus? And they're like, and they, talked for a few minutes, and then they left. And I went home, and I thought about it, and I was like, God, why was that so weird? Why was that so uncomfortable? And I realized that like, these weren't the Black people that were sought for in this group, that they weren't the sign of progress that this group was looking for. These weren't the Black people to be celebrated, right? They were to be talked about, like in articles, right? Advocated for when they were killed, but not to be included, not to shape the group in any way, right? And I was dating a woman at the time who wasn't from Seattle. She was from California. And I asked her, I said, how come you never go to these events? And she was like, oh, those are some bougie Black people. There's no way. And I was laughing.
I'm glad your sister friend homegirl told you what the deal was.
Yeah, she was like, no, absolutely not. Like, she was laughing at me. She's like, yeah, of course you went, but no, there's no way. And I realized, like, oh yeah, this is what privilege looks like. We've been patting ourselves on the back, but the truth is when it comes to Seattle, we all had like our tech jobs, right, to back up our art. We all had, all these things, right, where we could just dash out, get a bottle of wine, and bring it to a picnic in the middle of the day, right? We were a certain type of Black that we thought was successful, that we thought was acceptable, and we were celebrating the relative privilege we had without realizing that it came at the cost, came at the expense of a lot of other Black people. And I just didn't, I still actually love a lot of what that group does. And there are a lot of people who like come to Seattle with tech jobs and don't have any friends because they came from tech job like in Atlanta, where they're used to seeing Black people in tech, and they come to Seattle and there's no Black people. And they're like, oh my God, this group's perfect for them.
Right.
But also it could be better, right? It could do so much more. And there are people who are harmed by that exclusion. And then I realized, it felt like so many other things that don't sit well with me when we, constantly talk about the Black people who didn't deserve to be shot, the Black people who deserve to be celebrated because they get A's in the white supremacist educational system, or because they got it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's when I recognized how easy it is, even in activism, to fall into respectability politics, and how dangerous that is, because we're just creating a new stratus, right? We're just moving the ladder around. We're not actually dismantling it. I got like 10 minutes, by the way, before I gotta jump.
No problem. Thank you.
I have another Zoom coming up.
I love it. Thank you for letting me know. So the last question I want to ask you, you had written a status about Ahmaud Arbery, and like I always feel like it's kind of like the same cycle.
Yeah.
Black man or Black woman, Black child, Black trans woman get shot by police, armed vigilante, some white person with a gun, and very few people rally behind it. And then it's like we were waiting for the proof or the evidence. And then the video comes out, and now everyone's incensed. And I think about all the time that's elapsed since January. And I also think about something you said when you were talking about we need to hold our politicians accountable, and how Joe Biden's out here just like, you know, trying to call for justice. And I'm like, of course you are. And so like, what, like, when is enough going to be enough for us? Or is it like we've just been desensitized to it happening so much? You know, and this question isn't for white people. I actually don't care
Yeah.
about their pain and their trauma surrounding this. I care about us. I care about the fact that, do I want to click on this video and see it? Do I, you know, and I was just hoping that you could share like a comforting, maybe it's not comforting, maybe it's just real as fuck, like word to impart us with, because that's super important to me, because I'm just like not able to process. And I was just hoping I could process it with someone I know.
Yeah. It's hard. You know, I have moments, there are things sometimes where I'm like, I just can't look at it right now. I can't do that to myself. And I would say that that's a normal survival instinct for people who are inundated with this sort of terror. And we are inundated with this terror. We can't survive feeling every bit of it. But I will say this.
Right.
We can honor that loss. People deserve to be grieved. And that impulse to grief that we think might break us apart is actually what's humanizing us. The fact that we do care, the fact that after all of this, we still care, that it still guts us, that's someone's baby, right? And I was sure when I started doing this work that it was going to break me apart. I was sure that if I opened myself up to it, and I wrote about this, that I would just scream and scream and scream and never stop. And I can definitely say I cry more than I ever thought I would in my life. I spend a lot more time grieving and crying. I can't discuss it without tearing up, like even right now. But opening that up and realizing it's not a weakness, realizing that it is normal to grieve our people, realizing that it is a beautiful thing to honor our people and to grieve their passing and to be devastated when they're taken from us, that people deserve to be missed and mourned, and we deserve to be missed and mourned. We deserve to be raged, you know, like we deserve the rage in the streets over our lives being taken. Like that's, we deserve all of that. We are worthy of that anger and outrage and fear and sadness and devastation. And recognize that you are part of a necessary and beautiful process, and that the problem will come when we can't do that anymore. But also recognize that opening yourself up to that, once you do that and you say, okay, you know what, I'm going to have to sit and say that it will not kill me.
Right.
You also become open to joy in a way that you weren't before. I couldn't allow myself to live in Black joy until I could sit in the devastation and the grief and the pain. And that's something that I think colonizers won't understand, right? They constantly want Black joy, right? They want and they can't even enjoy it fully because they aren't invested in it. They don't know what it's worth because they aren't even willing to feel the pain when we are stolen, right? When the moment I could do that, like I shed as many tears over watching Black kids playing in the street and knowing that that's what I'm fighting for. That's the beauty that still exists. I can look at our continued existence like the miracle that it is, right? Like the beauty that it is, because I know without any reservation what's been against us. I know the terror and the brutality that we've survived. And I'm not trying to romanticize perseverance. I'm trying to say that we mourn because we value Black life.
Right.
And you can't open yourself up to that full value if you also can't open yourself up to the grief. So know that that's half the coin. Know that when you're feeling that, like I have to remind myself, I'm feeling this pain because I love Black life. Right? It's not just the act of brutality, it's the life. And that life still exists, even if not with that person. And we are trying to protect that. And I think staying connected to all of that, finding space to collectively grieve, really honor that grief and honor the life that was taken is important. I think that a lot of times we are so busy thinking that the grief will kill us that we don't spend time to look at the life that was lived and to honor that and to recognize there's still beauty in that person and that person's memory.
Right.
And we have to be able to do that collectively because we have to remember our humanity. And we have to remember that we're fighting for not just to avoid death. We are fighting for full life, for the beauty of our existence in our life. And be open to that and reach out to people and know that some days you can't. Some days you just can't look at it. Some days you have to take a break. That's fine. Honor it, right? Don't do it when you can't, but also know that you're stronger than that and know that you're feeling it because you are full of love. And I think we forget that.
Thank you. My imparting question to you is, it's something I ask each and every one of my guests before we end the show. Thank you for that. Actually, I need a space, but I have to ask the question. And so it's a two-pronged question because I've always loved two-part questions. One, is there anything that you were surprised I did not ask you? And two, who would you like to see on the show?
Oh man. I mean, I think that in all honesty, we could probably talk forever. So I'm not surprised. I think that we're constrained by time and how wordy I am as a human. So no, I'm not surprised. I think that, we could have done this for 3-4 hours and would have talked about everything eventually,
Right.
Oh my gosh, who would I like to see on the show? I mean, I just love to see Black people talking. I have, I would say that there are people in spaces that I don't know. I would just love to see you talking with anyone, honestly. I would love to actually hear from people I don't know and that I'm not aware of, because I think for me, like encountering a new human that I didn't know was in this space. I would love to see youth as well. Like, I'd love to hear like how young people are getting through this time and seeing it, right? Because it's such a totally different world. So yeah, I think I would love to see.
You hear that, Zanetta? A personal invitation from Ijeoma herself, okay?
A younger person. I would love to see you in conversation with a younger person.
Of course.
And see how like they're looking at the world, how they're looking at this quarantine, how they're looking at race at their age, Yeah, I would love to see that.
All right. Thank you so much for appearing on this episode number 20 of The Full Set. I appreciate you. I love you so much. And I hope that you have a wonderful evening and enjoy your next call.
You too.
All right. Peace, y'all. Have a good night.